Here are 10 more of my favorite underrated writing techniques. Check out part 1 in the description, but let's jump into it. Number 1, blotted scenes/vignettes. So according to literaryterms.net, in literature, a vignette is a short scene that captures a single moment or a defining detail about a character, idea, or other element of the story. Vignettes are mostly descriptive. In fact, they often include little or no plot detail. They are not standalone literary works, nor are they complete plots or narratives. Instead, vignettes are small parts of a larger work and can only exist as pieces of a whole story. I love vignettes, and this is why. Vignettes are like short impressions of an idea. They're powerful little nuggets that leave a punch pretty much every single time, which is difficult to do in longer scenes because longer scenes don't necessarily need to do that. The shortness of a vignette, however, allows a writer to dip into a moment really quickly, capture it, and then leave. That can create exciting momentum in a story. This is why I like to refer to these kind of scenes as blotted, because they really are like taking a paintbrush with a little bit of paint and dabbing it here, then dabbing some more here and here and here until you see a complete picture. So a reason you might want to use vignettes is to capture the essence of a moment. The essence of a moment will work particularly well in books that are more character and vibe driven rather than plot driven. A great example of this is Tides by Sarah Freeman, which I read recently, and here is a small excerpt which is a vignette in the book. On the long bus journey out, she doesn't cry or even have a single thought that she can name. She watches the dark impossibility of the road instead, the mostly empty seats ahead of her, the head of a woman a few rows up, listing forward and then jolting back. She does not sleep. She wants to be awake to make her declaration at the border. She will show her passport, and when they ask where to, she will say without hesitation, the sea. Do you see how it's just an impression of a moment rather than like a giant escapade into a moment? My next favorite technique is third person present tense. So this is a point of view. It's also my favorite point of view and the point of view that I happen to be writing the most of. I love third person present tense because it mixes traditional, which is the third person, with a bit of the offbeat, which could be the present tense in this case. This is because you don't often see this point of view and tense pairing. Often you'll see third person past tense and you'll see first person past tense, you'll see first person present tense. You don't necessarily see third person present tense as much. I love this point of view because you can attain the intimacy of a first person narrative. So this can really mimic first person present tense, but you also still retain the third person voice / the distance of a third person narrative. I've written many books at this point in this point of view, and I find it's quite versatile. It has a seriousness to it that is captured by the more formal third person, but also a playfulness captured by the present tense. A reason you might want to write this point of view is if you're really interested in writing a voicey character, but have a larger world that you need to construct. I'm writing a fantasy book in this point of view. I've written literary fiction in this point of view. It's a great one. Number 3, subtextual dialogue. Dialogue is great, but dialogue that speaks so extremely in the subtext that you need to analyze it in order to understand what is being said is absolutely supreme. I personally love when people say things they don't mean. A lot of the times, human beings do this. I'll say, I'm fine, when I don't mean I'm fine. That's subtextual. It's interesting that humans do that. This can create and maintain high tension in a scene. This is a great reason to use subtextual dialogue. If you're writing a moment between two characters and you want that moment to be particularly tense, see what you can do about shifting that conversation into the subtext. A great example of this is Hannibal. I made an entire video analyzing a scene from the first episode of Hannibal, which is my favorite TV show. So I will link that in the description. I also discuss in depth how you can write more subtextual dialogue in your own work or even just write in the subtext in general. But here is an example from the episode that I analyzed. Close on small table, a beautifully presented breakfast for two served on a Tupperware container on top of place settings. Freshly brewed coffee is poured into the 2 cups Hannibal carried. Pop wide as Hannibal peels lid off the Tupperware dishes. Hannibal continued, I'm very careful about what I put into my body, which means I end up preparing most meals myself. A little protein scramble to start the day, some eggs, some sausage. Hannibal watches Will take a bite of his breakfast scramble. Now, to a viewer, you might just be like, well, this is just dialogue, but the subtext is Hannibal is a cannibal. So it's interesting that he said the words, I'm very careful about what I put into my body, because what does he mean there? Subtext like this can create really deep conversations. If you're trying to portray the closeness or the unsaid closeness of a relationship, this could be a great technique to use. It's something that I use all the time when I'm writing with Lonan and Harrison, who never actually speak to each other. They just, I don't know, mumble in subtext and hope the other gets the message. The next technique is Hypophora. Hypophora is when you ask a question and answer it immediately. This can create a really quirky tone in the narrative. You can also use Hypophora to create disorientation in the narrative, or on the other hand, create a conversational tone. It is quite versatile. This technique is something you might want to use if you're trying to create a sense of reflection in the narrative. If you're trying to create a sense of confusion, you can also do it as well, like a character questioning something, giving themselves an answer, questioning it again, giving themselves an answer. There's a lot you can do with Hypophora. My next favorite technique is unwords. So let's explain what an unword is. As a poet, I absolutely love and prioritize the sound words make. Un has a really soft, round feeling in the mouth, and I find it very satisfying to say, which is why I love unwords. For example, unblessed, uncombed, undead. Words like this make me very excited, so I'm including it here, even though it's like less of a technique and more just pointing to words that I absolutely love. The reason you might want to do this is to increase the rhythm into your piece. Instead of saying her hair was knotted, you could say her hair was uncombed. There's something really pretty about the un there that makes me excited, but maybe this is just a nerdy one. Number 6, thematic revelations. Thematic revelations are very typical in short fiction. I made a video talking about how you can write your own short story, which I will link in the description, and I talked about the thematic revelation. This is usually a moment where the character rises above the story and is able to reflect on what is essentially the core or the theme of the story. To me, this is very satisfying, and it cinches the story together where maybe it hadn't fully come together. This is what really braids it all. When short stories miss this, I kind of feel sad because I really look forward to it. I love seeing how a character now feels after the events of the story. It doesn't have to be overt. Most of the time it's very subtle, but a reason you might want to include this is to really round out your ending, to create a more satisfying read. My next favorite technique is chapter titles. So I will not shut up about chapter titles because they are a fantastic opportunity if you are a novelist. If you write chapters and you don't title them, you're missing out on an opportunity, and here's why. Titling is hard, and the only way to get better at titling is to practice. So if you're only ever titling a book when you finish one, which, let's say once every couple months, once every couple of years, if you're more like me, you might not be exercising your title muscle as much as you could be. Titling chapters is a great way to do this because you can finish chapters a lot faster than you can finish an entire novel. I have a very in-depth seminar on how you can title better. I break down the types of titles, what type of title you might be interested in writing, and I also have some exercises on how to title at the end of that video. So check that out if you are not really great at titling and you want to get better at it. Chapter titles act as a North Star for your chapter. They really recontextualize what the entire thing was focused around, especially if you're writing a round story structure where here's a theme and all of the events sort of circle around that theme. Chapter titles can be very useful for you. It's a great way to reflect on your writing and see what themes you can pick out. It might actually help you title your book because a lot of the times a title from your book can come from one of your chapter titles. This has happened to me many times. They make you ask, what's the most important part of this chapter and how can I describe that in just a few words? It's harder than you think, but it's very worth it. Number 8, mirroring. Mirroring is usually when something in the fictive present triggers a memory or a flashback or something that happened in the past. This is a great way to create a causal chain between the fictive present and the fictive past. This can be done a little bit like heavy-handedly. Let's say I'm going on a roller coaster today. Oh, remember the time that we went on a roller coaster? It can be a bit heavy-handed, but it can also be satisfying if a character is reminded overwhelmingly by something that is really minuscule. For example, your character smells something or touches something, and that small interaction with the sense is enough for them to be reminded of something else. Number 9, closing sentence literary punch. This is more of an abstract concept, so it's not as easy to nail down or identify or be black and white about. You see the literary punch a lot in short stories. You also can see it in novels where a writer may end off a scene on a bit of a punch, like the last line has like a bite to it. A literary punch can be described as a moment in literature where a particular emphasis is made. Closing sentence literary punch is a literary punch that happens at the end of a paragraph. It's supposed to be a satisfying twist or torque of a knife that urges a reader to either keep reading or to think about what they just read for a long time after. This kind of thing is really common in poetry because the last line of a poem is super important most of the time. But when it's done in fiction, it's so exciting because it creates this level of ooh la la to your prose that can really draw a reader in. That's a reason you might want to use this technique. It can also create a bit of a gut punch reaction where you're like, wow, I really felt that. Here's an example from Randy Travis by Sue Vancombe Tamafangsa, which is one of my absolute favorite short stories. So this story is about a mother who moves to Canada. She's kind of struggling in this new country until she finds the music of Randy Travis, and she becomes really quite obsessed with Randy Travis. And her husband in this scene is kind of trying to be Randy Travis for her. Her broad and hopeful smile vanished from her face, but my father only tried harder, belting out the chorus louder, holding on to the vowels, trying to produce a southern twang. He was no star. He was no leading man. He packed store furniture into cardboard boxes for a living. No one would pay to see him sing, but he didn't care. He was only trying to be what my mother wanted. That last sentence is the last sentence of that scene, and with the context of the rest of the story, it really is that gut punch of, oh my god, I really feel this. This is so emotional. Finally, number 10, psychic distance, push and pull. Oh, how I love this technique. According to the Itch of Writing, psychic distance is, quote, where the narrative and therefore the reader stands relative to a character. Psychic distance is fun because it determines whether or not we're in a super close narrative or a farther narrative, whether it's super distant, whether we feel like we're in the head of the character or hovering outside of them. The thing is, you don't have to stick to one psychic pole when you're writing. You can experiment with this, and I do this kind of a lot in my writing because I find it fun. You can push into that psychic distance, make it really close when you want to make the emotions your character is feeling feel unbearable to the reader. You can also pull it way back when your character might be going through something. If your character dissociates, this might be a technique you use where you pull all the way out of the story. You can use psychic distance sometimes like paint. You can thin it out sometimes or add it in thick layers. Now, this is a great technique if, again, you are trying to boost the emotions, or on the other hand, you're doing the opposite. You're trying to strip back all of the emotions, all of the sensory information. So depending on what you're trying to do, playing with this, pushing with it, pulling it out is really a great way to create a bit of a like psychic diversity in terms of how the psychic distance works, how the psychic plane works in your book. You don't necessarily need to be stuck right in the middle all the time. You can push, you can pull, you can push, you can pull. I think it's effective for getting into characters who might not usually be vulnerable. Let's push them into that vulnerability. Or if they are usually vulnerable, let's make them super numb on this end and let's reflect that in the narrative. It's a great way in terms of craft, not just word choice, not just the actual sentences itself, that you can evoke feelings and emotions within a reader. So those are 10 more of my favorite underrated writing techniques. Let me know if you want to see another video like this in the future. Also, let me know in the comments which one is your favorite from this video, or is there an underrated writing technique that you absolutely love? Don't forget to check out part 1, which I posted a couple of years ago that you guys seem to really like. Like I said, it'll be in the description. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video. Bye.